So welcome everybody to PWO's Roundtable discussion. And we are talking about community supports today, how, we all kind of support the communities that we live in, that we work in, that we work with. And we just want to, have an informal roundtable chat about what that looks like for different communities in Ontario. And also, what are the challenges that we see people, in accessing perinatal mental health specific services in Ontario. And maybe we can even do a little brainstorming and problem solving because, when we get together, I think we all could change the world if only, those big systems would listen to us. So I just want to introduce myself. So I'm Christine Cunningham, and I'm the founder of Perinatal Wellbeing Ontario. And I am a social service worker working in private practice. So my main gig is counseling people in the perinatal population who are, dealing with perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, and that transition, to parenthood, also living with fertility challenges, birth trauma, and all of those things. And I just want to say that I am in Durham region. And so I just like to acknowledge that, we are on the traditional treaty territories of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation and the Mississauga peoples and treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, and Oshawa is covered under the Williams Treaty. And so I'm going to just throw it to the next person. And if you all want to introduce yourselves, my pronouns are she, her. Feel free to share yours if you want to or not. And let us know if you want to do a land acknowledgement for where you are, please feel free. And also like what communities you live in or work in or support when it comes to perinatal mental health or perinatal, work in general. And we'll go from there. So I will pass to the next person on my screen, who is Anneke.
Hello, everybody. I'm having a little bit of a cold, but, because, it's not contagious through the screen. I'm here. Hi. My name is Anneke. I have been working in the perinatal field for around 5 years. I've done a lot of different things, different roles. I'm really coming from peer work, so that is my lens. I have lived experience with perinatal depression. I'm a depression gal. I can really go there. However, we do live with a lot of anxiety in our household, and I don't understand it, but I'm trying, I'm learning. So that's where I come from. I work a lot right now, lots of low income, newcomer, some Indigenous clients as well. I have worked in the past with young parents, so really all over the board. I see a lot of different people and try to meet them where they're at, and it looks very, very different for different people. I'm currently residing on the Algonquin Anishinaabe grounds area, territory, and it has never been surrendered. It's unceded territories. So I really want to acknowledge that, and I'm very happy to be here, but I'm also really upset about a lot of, the ways that we keep doing land acknowledgements, and that's now it, and not being able to do much more for them. So my heart goes out to the Indigenous peoples, and I'm so happy that today we can celebrate the first First Nations premiere of Manitoba. I'm just saying, I'm really excited. Congratulations, Manitoba. I'm just saying, we're next. I don't think so, but maybe. So that's me.
Thank you, Anneke. Who do you want to pass it to?
I'm passing it on to Laine, because my new best friend.
Hello, my name is Laine Halpern Zisman. I use she, her pronouns. I am in Toronto, also known as Toronto. This land has been the home and hunting place to many people, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Cree, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, and the Wendat, and all those nations recorded and unrecorded, acknowledged and unacknowledged, who continue to care for this land. I think it's especially important when talking about birth and family and fertility that we take seriously, not just the land acknowledgement, but what it means and how settler colonialism continues to shape and cause violence against Indigenous families and their birthing experiences. So I am a fertility support practitioner and a full spectrum doula. I work with Seed and Sprout, which is an organization that supports LGBTQ folks on their perinatal journeys. I facilitate a monthly support group with them. I also have a private practice as a fertility support practitioner, and I work with an organization or a company called On Fertility as a care advocate. I'm also a postdoctoral fellow at the School of Public Health and Social Policy, where I'm studying reproductive health access and equity. So I'm coming at this both from the lens of supporting folks in community and evidence-based research and how to try to improve the current landscape. That's me.
I love it. Thank you so much, Laine. Who do you want to pass it to?
I'll pass it to Gab.
Thanks, Laine. Hi, my name's Gabrielle. I also go by Gab. I use they, them pronouns. Today I'm joining this video call from Treaty 2 and Treaty 35 lands, also known as Windsor, Ontario. I am a full spectrum doula, but I'm really coming into this work as someone with lived experience, as a community member. I have the amazing opportunity to work with folks in a variety of environments, connecting with other professionals and having conversations about how do we show up for folks in community in trauma-informed ways rooted in harm reduction. And yeah, I love what I do. I'm happy to be here. I also work with Seed and Sprout and a few other organizations as well.
Thank you, Gab. And last but not least, Lisette.
Hello. My name is Lisette. I use she, her pronouns. I am calling in from the Haldeman tract. It's always interesting trying to remember to have you say these words. It's traditional territories of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Definitely, we're seeing a lot of extra work that folks are doing, especially with learning and spending the time learning more about traditions. And I'm a co-executive director of Together for Perinatal Mental Health in Waterloo Region. And so we're trying to be very purposeful in our reaching out to the Indigenous organizations to find out how we can support the work that they're already doing, and being able to use our privilege that way. I'm also a postpartum doula, so I do that work. I get to hold babies and give them back at the end of the day. Yeah, I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. So I'm so excited and grateful to have you all here. So, let's jump into it, because you all work and support people in the perinatal period in different capacities in different ways. And I think a lot of us come into this and do a lot of different things. That's what I'm hearing for sure, is we all do a lot of different things with different organizations. And, that's kind of what it looks like right now in Ontario, especially, accessing OHIP covered services is pretty tough. It's also limited in what's available. So I talk about this a lot, these grassroots organizations, we're here, filling these gaps, right? So I'm curious to know for you all, what are these barriers that you see to access? And anyone who wants to start, go. And I know these are big questions. Let's just see how we go. Let's just see what happens when we open up this discussion. No pressure. Okay, I'll start. How about that? So it's all good. It's all good. I have never also done this. So just as we all know, I'm not like an expert roundtable host person. Yeah. So anyway, okay. So I will say for me, kind of the reason like starting PWO was that barriers to access, especially OHIP services. In private practice, I have clients who can afford private practice practitioners, which is expensive. So either they pay out of pocket or they have extended healthcare benefits that they can use to access my services. That leaves out a massive chunk of the population, right? And so with PWO, we wanted to expand the pay what you can therapy services that Olivia Scobie started with Postpartum Support Toronto throughout the province of Ontario. And so having students that provide that support, that therapeutic support in their final practicum, and providing on a pay what you can scale. So quite low cost compared to private practice. And we do have like free, like subsidized spots as well. Because the access to free services is so limited. So I'll start there. What do you all think of that? Do you see that in the communities that you live in or support? What is that like?
I can say that is definitely one of the major barriers. And I think in addition to that, just not having the energy to then seek out the free options, and I think this is one of the like the referrals. I think a lot of people just need to know, I know somebody and they can take you on, and this is how it's going to look like. And if you don't like them, send me a message, we get you something else or somebody else. And that's what I usually do, because a lot of people, they are not used to prioritize their own mental health. They will do everything for their children. So, and sometimes it's not so much even a money issue. It's more like, I don't have the time for that, or I don't have the money for that, right? They will buy all the swings, they will buy all the, the formula that they need. They have money for that, but they don't have a budget for when it comes to mental health. And it's very hard for them to find that time and space. Another thing as well is to just, what I see a lot with certain communities is also the part of, I just have to be more religious, for example. I just have to do more this, therapy is not really a way to cure this, praying, I need to do fasting. I'm just not strong enough. So really those are real hard stigmas around mental health that I find that a lot of other organizations have not really been able to really address as much. It's more like, oh, we cannot talk about mental health, but just, taking the blame out of it and just saying, I'm not, I'm just too weak for this. Especially parenthood, but specifically for those who call themselves a mother. Motherhood is equal to martyrdom, right? Like, as in Islam, paradise is under the feet of the mothers. It has to be hard. It has to be difficult. And because I feel very sad, because I feel very anxious, I am just not up to this. It has nothing to do with my mental health. I just have to be more strong, more religious. Grow up. These are the things I hear. I don't know. I'm sure that there's a lot of other things, but these are just things that I see.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate it. And so what I hear in that too is like, and I agree, like that for me, I had the experience of being, I had postpartum anxiety and depression with my third. It was really severe, and that like finding services, also forget finding services, knowing what's going on, knowing what PMADs are. I think that is a big barrier first and foremost, because if you don't know what's going on, then what are you going to get support for? Right. I was just like, clearly I'm just, something's wrong with me. Like I'm not coping like with the way other people are, but it's not for any reason. Maybe I'm weak, I'm broken, whatever. I didn't know what postpartum anxiety was. So that, education piece, us talking more about it in the mainstream and, with everyday friends, right? And people who are not in the field, I find that a big struggle. Whereas like, I love having these discussions and, talking with colleagues all the time about stuff, but then talking to people who aren't in this field, And they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like, they don't really, it's not a big deal until it affects them, right? I'm also hearing, and what you're saying too is like, then yeah, having that energy to be able to seek out the services. So even if I can afford it, it's like, where do I go to even start? Like, how do I start? How do I know what's out there? Right? Of course, there's Google, but sometimes that even feels too hard. So I think us being able to get the word out more about what is available, what's out there, how do we do that? Where do we do that? Right? I think too, also, having practitioners, whether it's in private practice or, in the field, or even OHIP covered services, or these big centers where they're not culturally informed, or, really not able to connect on that level, that I think is really crucial. Obviously, culture is so important, right? I think there's a big gap there. What do you all think about that? What Anneke was saying?
I think that the cultural norms and expectations are a huge barrier to recognizing what's happening within your own body and mind, and acknowledging that, okay, that's actually not normal, and you're not supposed to feel that heavy weight, and there is different ways to do things. But I also think that it can be challenging because of the things you've both mentioned, even when you're talking with friends and family, and they're just like, oh, that's just motherhood, you'll figure it out, you'll be fine, it'll be okay, that's what you signed up for. And giving all these messages around like that's what it's supposed to be, and not only from friends and family, but like also media, like I love me some television, I love me my Netflix time, but there's a lot of shows where you see parents, and particularly like birth parents and mothers, who are like doing the most and like consistently overextending themselves. And then when you bring in those additional intersectional layers, the opportunity, I think, to reach out for support just feels like a little bit too far of a stretch or too much of a risk. Mm-hmm. If I go and tell someone honestly that I'm experiencing dark thoughts, what's going to happen, right? And so your protection kicks in. You're going to do everything under the sun for your child. And so I'm going to stay quiet, actually, because I don't know what's going to happen if I'm honest. I know that was my own experience. And so I struggled way longer than I needed to, because of the fear of stigma, the fear of retaliation, because of all of the like the positionality that I was in at the point in time, being young, being of the African diaspora, being on OW, on a sex, like all of these layers just made me too afraid almost. And I think that that's a big barrier as well.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I've been talking a lot, so I'll let other people jump in, but my gosh, I so agree. Yeah.
Can jump in. Yeah, everyone's been providing such like wonderful insights. A lot of the things that I support, a lot of the time when I'm supporting people, I'm supporting them earlier in their journey. So I'm supporting them when they are in the process of building their families. And the experience of anxiety and depression then I think can feel really isolating, because not everyone is public or out about the process that they're going through in order to build their families. So that can present even more barriers to finding access to care, to being able to speak, and to being able to find outlets for education. We can feel like a lot of stigma around that experience. And I think conversations around safe medications or outlets for coping strategies can become a lot more hushed or feel more secret. And that's a really hard process, because I think the way that we grow from this, the way that we start to build those strategies is through community and collectivity and collaboration and finding other folks who are going through something similar. So I think in what everyone is saying is it's so true that like when you don't have an outlet for community, when you don't feel like you can speak, then you're not able to access resources or education or to feel that like familiarity or belonging that comes with finding people who share your experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And especially when it's not, I think too, like this is where language comes in and why language is so important, that when everything you see is about moms, right? Or parents, right? But you're on your fertility journey and you haven't had a baby yet, then that contributes to the isolation, right? The language that we use as professionals, as, professional helpers, as peer workers, all those things, like that contributes to isolation as well, I think. Yeah. Yeah. And those, also I was talking about that education of like us, like as let's say when we're experiencing a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder or symptoms or something's going on for us, like, and not having that education or understanding, knowing what's going on. But for care providers as well, because to what you were saying, Gab, is, I have had interactions with, care providers in the field who are not perinatal focused, right? But they're working in, for example, system navigation, and someone discloses they're having intrusive thoughts and they call CAS. We have, I think, a lot of professionals here, right, who are listening, and it's like important to understand, like us as professionals, if you don't work in the perinatal field, but you interact with anyone on a perinatal journey, it's so important to understand what the signs and symptoms are of PMADs and what constitutes, a duty to report. Intrusive thoughts are not a duty to report. I am saying that out loud and proud, and we can discuss it all day long, and I'm okay with that.
So I want to interrupt here, because for some people it is actually literally mentioned as if they have intrusive thoughts that they have a duty to report, and these are not mental health professionals, and that's why. So like even working with a lot of these people that are working with populations that we might not be able to reach, understanding that they cannot have these conversations.
Exactly.
And then the fear around, like, but who is speaking to these people? Like, we cannot go in the supermarket and say, oh my gosh, you look really bad today. Like, what's going on? Are you having like depression, anxiety, thoughts? I see you're struggling. Like, we can't do that. But there's people that see these, people that are going through a hard time every day, and they know they cannot talk about it because it's not in their scope.
Right.
And that's one of the things that, as a society, putting all these rules into place and catching people and being like on that early intervention part, and really, but we are overdoing it a little bit. And that's why I think that peers are so important, because peers usually don't really have a duty to report. At least I have not had a lot of duty report that is very, very strict, unless there is like clear intention, there is clear danger going on. And even then, I've had conversations with people. It was not like, okay, I have to do this. There was only one case, and it was a conversation with somebody, and they actually said thank you, because I knew there was something wrong here. But for a lot of people, a lot of professionals who are working in different areas, there's just no room to have that conversation, no room to make that differentiation, because their duty to report is just very, very
right. And it's
strict.
It can, of course, it's influenced by the organization. Look, I'm not, I'm just gonna say it. If we think about the duty to report, that's based on like what is something that's investigatable by CAS. And I'm talking about Ontario, I'm in Ontario, we're all in Ontario, so I'm going to use CAS as the term. Intrusive thoughts, we all have them. And I know this is not an education session. However, every single human being on the planet has intrusive thoughts, because it's just unwanted thoughts that come into our brain. That is not a danger to ourselves or our baby, especially if someone is like, and that scares me, and that upsets me that I have those thoughts. then that means they're not going to act on them, right? But the whole point of my little soapbox rant is that creates a barrier. Like Gab said, I don't want to share. I was the same. The intake nurse asked me, do you have intrusive thoughts? I was like, what is that? And then she explained it to me. I was like, no, I 100% did. And I was like, well, she's going to take my kid away. She's going to think I can't, and I also recognize my privilege as a white woman. And I had that fear. So I can only imagine when there's more intersections there, right? Of how much that keeps people in isolation, right? This is why I'm talking about it, because as practitioners, and if you're healthcare providers or you're helping professionals and you're watching, you watch this later on YouTube, it's so important for us to understand how are we each contributing to creating these barriers for people accessing our services and accessing any services, right? How we interact with people, especially when they're so vulnerable, is going to have big impacts on them, even when they're out going to try to find other services. If they felt supported, they're probably more likely to reach out to someone else in the future if they need it, right? So Niema had a comment, I was so lucky to meet a clinician that told me that I wasn't crazy for having intrusive thoughts, that it's normal and that many women go through it, that there are books written on this, that you love your baby so much and that you are scared of them. Absolutely. Good Moms Have Scary Thoughts. Karen Kleiman is, a great go-to book. There's lots out there, but people can say, oh, it's okay, I'm here to support you, and I'm just going to go call CAS and report you to them. That is not telling people that we support them, right? I'm going to stop my little rant. What do the rest of you think?
I was just going to add to this, like Anneke and I just did a training with some early childhood educators, and they're one of the fields where they have a duty to report for intrusive thoughts. So knowing that ahead of time, and as we're teaching them about perinatal mental health, what it can look like, what it can sound like, we help them to build scripts for how to turn the conversation so that the parent doesn't admit anything, but that you can still get them help. Because oh, they're about to tell me something I'm going to have to report, but I know that they're okay. It's just an intrusive thought. How do we swing this conversation in a way that they're still feeling supported, but then it doesn't escalate? So,
yeah,
but like that's not happening everywhere. Not every ECE is going to get that kind of training and support. So it's just needs to happen more. People need more training.
Yeah.
I think it's also like how CAS or like children's aid services are explained to people during their education journey to become an ECE or to become a psychologist, to become whatever. It's portrayed as a service that is there to support you. Like when I had CAS engagement, that's what I was told. Oh, these people are going to come and help you. They're going to make things better. They're going to make sure that, you and your kiddo are okay. And, maybe at a high level on the policy paperwork, that's what it's about. But in reality, it feels like you're already drowning or you're stuck in this bubble, and then someone is just like banging on your door, like, and I think what Lisette shared, the question prompts is a total opposite reaction. Like someone isn't barging in, they're asking questions where the door is still closed and giving you the option to open it or not. And I think that's what new parents are like, anyone along their perinatal journey, because Laine, you brought something up that I realized that I don't think about enough, is like how your mental health is impacted from beginning all the way to the end, right? Like the journey of becoming a parent doesn't start at the pregnancy. There's often things before that, right? And that's often missed in the conversations as well, and not considered most of the time.
Yeah, and I feel like with like a lot of people, when they have someone to talk to at those beginning stages, it helps them to build their team for later on and be prepared. Like the people that I speak with, they learn how to advocate for themselves. They learn how to build their team. They learn their rights. And like if you're not having those conversations early on, it's just takes longer and longer to build those skills and to learn that information, because there's no like go-to stop to teach you what your rights are or to teach you how to ask questions, because we live in a society where like we're taught not to, right? Like we're taught not to ask questions, where we have this idealized image of a parent that we try to like shove ourselves into. And when we have feelings that are outside of that, we can often feel like not only like dysregulated, but like broken, as was said before. Like we really feel like we can't access care because we're not deserving or because we're too far gone. So starting early on to have those conversations, it sort of like breaks that silence so that you can have that a little bit of that voice as you continue on the journey. And I think the other thing that was said before was around this idea of like privilege, not only being about like economic privilege, which obviously has a huge impact on this journey, but also how economic privilege influences like time. That like even if like you had coverage for an appointment, if you have to work a 12-hour day, you don't have time to meet with someone, right? Like you don't have, even if you don't have a job, but you have like child minding responsibilities, you don't have time when you're like holding a kiddo to like sit and talk about your feelings. So I think we also need to like recognize the privilege of luxury, like of leisure time, that leisure time also requires privilege, and that is a huge barrier to accessing care. And I think when we talk about strategies for change, we also have to think about leisure time as one of the barriers.
Yeah, that's such a great point, because also that like brings into like the accessibility piece in terms of, if you're a care provider, are you virtual? Are you in office? If you are virtual, can people, like the population that you work with, do they have the means to access you virtually? Do they have access to internet? Do they have access to a device where they're able to, you know, engage in that appointment? And if you're in person, are your services accessible by a bus route? The population that you work with, can they afford the bus fare to take the bus route? If, you know, if there are rural clients, if your catchment area is big, you know, how are those rural clients getting to you? You know, are your premises wheelchair accessible? You know, all of those things are super, super, super important to think about when we are providing support, right? Because those are big barriers. Do you allow people to bring their kids? You know, what does that look like? If someone has neurodiversity, ADHD, for example, and let's say they're chronically late for appointments, are you penalizing them? You know, if someone has addictions issues, are you penalizing them for missing appointments? Because that happens often, right? Like how it's not just in the hour session or in that time that you're supporting that person, you know, one-to-one. It's like all the other things too that come together that help people access that service and feel, I don't love using the word safety, but like feel comfortable enough to access your services. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing as well, like just a misunderstanding and the privilege of understanding what mental health care looks like. And what I'm noticing a lot is that in different communities, there can be very strong narratives, stories that just keep repeated over and over. When I was pregnant with my first, there was a conversation in the Arab community that there was somebody, their child was taken away and there was certain circumstances. And this is a real fear thing. And us as outsiders, I'm a half insider. I can get my way, but it's really hard to fight that and to really understand. I was working with a client last year who wasn't accessing any services, even though they were food insecure, they were refugees, because the story, the narrative in the community was, if you do that, there is no path to citizenship. There isn't. You're going to be marked and that's it. And understanding, and for us it's like, oh my gosh, but yeah, no, it doesn't work like that. Yeah, but if you're hearing that and your friends are telling you that and your neighbors are telling you that, and there's so much fear and so much insecurity about your status, about your well-being, it's just really, really scary. And we can say whatever we want, and we can say, no, you should access these services, but they have so much more to lose than we can sometimes even fathom. And then another thing, and I liked how you brought it up as well, Christine, understanding the mental health care, and really looking at how accessible things are. Like really having conversations with people, giving them opportunity to ask. I had somebody reach out who wanted to do counseling after she had given birth. Sexual trauma came, but she did not want her husband to know. Her husband was literally dropping her off, but she didn't understand that whatever stays in this session would not be reported back to her, because back home that would have been a conversation. That's what she felt like. So really talking and making them understand, making people understand that what we are doing here is not going anywhere. My duty to report is only, pertaining to this. If you have any questions around that, like, you are here as an adult, I don't have to report back to your husband or your parents or, those kind of issues. And that's another thing that I find a lot with a lot of cultural communities. There's a couple of psychotherapists or social workers that might speak the language, but they are not trusted because they have not given appropriate advice. Sometimes I've heard experiences of actually things being told that was said at the therapist, and it was just becoming, the therapist was sharing a story, and then others were just like, oh my gosh, because the community is so small. And that has happened quite a bit. Or therapists that have literally told women, so what are you cooking tonight? Just focus on that. And these are Canadian therapists who really thought, males predominantly, who thought that that would be helpful because they understood the women from their own communities.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Anneke. And I think it speaks so loudly to like the implications of like the power that these care providers hold, and like the impacts of stigma and their own bias and perspectives, I suppose, around parenting, right? Like in this situation, the suggestion of cooking a meal, I suppose, is supposed to benefit mental health, maybe. Not me personally, that stresses me out, but thinking of like my own experiences as well, it just really resonated of like, I think sometimes things are suggested and offered that aren't needed in the moment. And when working with the perinatal community, like what they really need is someone to listen and validate. Listen and validate again. Listen some more and validate again, and ask what they need. If they want suggestions, then maybe go that route, but don't jump the gun. And I was also thinking about the time piece, because I remember I was able to access some free therapy services. It's like a 12-week session series, and the only time that was available was the hour before I had to pick my kid up from school or from daycare. And so I would go to therapy, cry for an hour, and then cry on the whole TTC ride to go pick up my kid. And then like it just was so destabilizing. It actually wasn't helpful because all of those fresh emotions were brought up on the surface. And then I had to go do the thing that was stressing me out, right? And so I think the time piece is really important. And I know there's certain things that people can control and certain things they can't, especially when it comes to free services. But if there is a possibility when you are working with folks, like, consider what's happening with the rest of their day. Like, if they have to go do school pickup, maybe don't schedule the session with them. Find if there's ways that you can rework things or connect them with someone else who can work with them at a different time in the day to allow that time to process. I learned after that 12-week series that I can't do it. I need hours in between to reset and ground and soothe myself before going back into the role of caregiving.
Yeah, that's so important. And it is like taking into account the whole picture, right? Like, what contributes to someone's life, what is, like, it's not just in that moment, but it is all those things, right? And all the intersections. And I know, as care providers, and depends on the area we're in, I know our system is broken, and there's a lot of places where that can happen and people don't do it, right? I get that. However, I think, again, that's a big barrier for people accessing, and it's important for us to do the best we can in whatever role we're in to try and consider all those factors and ask, right? Like, and especially with parenting, I think there's like, parenting is just this thing where, like, we all have our biases and we can't say we don't, like, we do, right? And so, someone you're working with might share something that they do with their kid, and you're like, oh, in your head, like, oh, I wouldn't do that, and we have to check our biases, right? We have to be aware. Like, it's so, so crucial, because again, the way we react and the words we say, all this stuff is so important, and will, like, people will just latch onto that, right? And that can just end your relationship with that person, and that's it, right? I'll read a couple of comments. So one comment is, we need a number of educational initiatives. One, raising awareness in general public, multilingual, yes. In all perinatal network services programs, yes. Again, I say this, like, a dream of mine is to talk about anyone, like chiropractors, like massage therapists, like anyone who ever interacts with someone who is in the perinatal period. Like, we need to be, like, trauma informed and, like, perinatal informed, labor and delivery, absolutely. Postnatal care networks, including pediatric care, parenting programs, and absolutely CAS services. I totally agree. When we think about, again, we don't have a national strategy as of yet, but kind of that, like, healthcare providers are not required to screen parents or people for PMADs. So again, if we think about someone, accessing a fertility clinic to start their family, I don't know every person that is, starting a family in a fertility clinic, but my clients personally who've come to me with, anxiety, depression, intense grief that they don't have time to work through, people that they're interacting with at the fertility clinic don't ask them, like, how are you doing? Oh, like, this is your 8th round of IVF. Like, how are you feeling? There's no time for it. Right? Yeah. Laine is like, yes. Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I was actually just typing this in response to someone's comment, but I'll just say it, that, like, I think we're, like, increasingly seeing the impact of having a 2-tiered health system that just reinforces health disparities and inequities, that, like, the people who can afford extra support, can afford extra attention, are getting those things. And then they are in a better situation than people who can't access those. And it's like, you see that impact generationally, right? Like, we see that as an ongoing barriers, because when we're not set up for success, when we don't have someone to speak with throughout our journeys, then we're taught that we don't deserve those things. So it becomes more and more difficult to reach out for help. It becomes more and more difficult to know where help is. And it becomes more and more difficult to instill in your child that they deserve help, right? That they can reach out for help, because we're constantly bombarded with these messages that we're not deserving. And that is the problem with having a two-tiered system. And a lot of the work that I do now ends up being like by text message or by email. And that is one way for us to like move around people's time constraints or make them not worry about like ongoing payments. Like, just text me, just email me. Because if you're going through a hard time, you need to know that someone is here for you, right? Like, we need to know as human beings that there are people that want to listen to us, and that there are people who've gone through similar journeys, and that there's a way through. So it's like, whilst that we live in a country where we're supposed to have healthcare that really just recreates and intensifies health disparities and the social determinants of health, like, we're not in a good place for supporting people. So I think that there are strategies, but a lot of the strategies have to exist outside of the system because of how the system is currently designed. Like, it is an intentional design.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll read this comment. As a private practice lactation consultant, I find that those who are of lower SES or income or have struggled in the past with their feeding journeys are A, afraid to access lactation and feeding support, or B, cannot afford the services that I provide. Although we have a free prenatal and well baby clinic in the Simcoe community, feeding support very broad and not individualized. I find that a lot of the work that I do is the support and validation of feeding or choices made in their feeding journey. There is little support in our community for culturally diverse feeding populations, religious beliefs, and familial influence on the feeding journey. Even those who have private insurance, generally these populations are of higher SES. Most plans do not cover lactation or feeding support services. It's so unfortunate that support for the perinatal and postpartum period is either non-existent or lasts for 6 weeks. Yes. And that, you know, so we talk about accessing services, but also when there's no services to access, right? That's obviously a major barrier, right? That, you know, and again, there's a lot that is broken about our system, but when we think about having babies and welcoming babies into the family, it's like, once that baby's out, the birthing person is kind of left to the side. And again, speaking to like, we don't have people checking in with us, right? After we've had a baby. People are like, oh, baby's fine. Great. You're doing great. You know, and you're just like, I'm half dead here, but cool, thanks, you know. And even the fact that these services, for example, lactation consultants, sure, you might get some support in the hospital, maybe, you know, unless God forbid you give birth on a Sunday, you know, there's no lactation in support in a hospital on a Sunday sometimes, not all hospitals, but I have had people that have encountered that. So what do? Right? Your baby just screams for another 24 hours until you can get some support. And then even the way that's handled with people who are not trauma informed, who are not perinatal mental health informed either, and the way they're supporting people in hospital post-delivery with nursing challenges and all that kind of stuff is not great. And, you know, so again, even like Laine said, the system is designed that way, right? It's like these services don't even really exist in a no HIP covered system where people can access them for free. They have to pay out of pocket, or, you know, yeah, I don't know any benefits that cover that sometimes. But for a lot of people, that's not accessible, right?
And I also want to really point out that a lot of insurance is not anymore what it used to be. Like a lot of things are not covered, and a lot of things will not be covered. And even when it's free, you have to sometimes almost sign your life away to make sure that you fit into that. Bring your income pay stubs, bring, you know, how long, oh my gosh, you're a newcomer, you're here for 5.5 years. No, you're not a newcomer anymore. Like, you have to be within the last 5 years. Like, these are just all the hoops that some people have to, like, you're just like, oh my gosh, I waited like 2 months and now I'm not eligible anymore, or my child is over 12 months and I'm still struggling with some other issues that I don't fit into that. It's really, that's driving me nuts. Another thing too that I'm really, really shocked at, you know, the lack of awareness even from a lot of therapists. I heard a therapist saying, we were talking about intrusive thoughts, and she started up with, okay, let's fight that intrusive thought. You have a healthy baby. And I was just like, kill me right here. This is not the way we started off. Like, let's fight this. You have a healthy baby, right? You have and like the double checking. And I'm just like, yeah, no, not on point here. Let's just,
Yeah.
Like, you cannot complain. You have a healthy baby. You produced.
Exactly.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And go ahead, Gab. No.
I just wanted to, like, it's a systemic issue. Like, all of these barriers are systemic.
Yeah.
And I think, like, I guess I'll speak from my own experience, like, that is what made those early days so challenging, is because of all those systemic barriers and the journey of navigating through the system and going to this service and getting the door closed on you, and going over here but only getting a little bit over here, and then you got to go over here to get a little bit more, and you're stretched so thin trying to just make it through the next day. And it doesn't help that we live in a society that, like, celebrates when you do it on your own, and that's so unrealistic for parenting. It's not something that can be done alone. Like, it is supposed to be community based, and that's what leads to these grassroots organizations and all these community initiatives. Like, we as humans and parents and caregivers find ways to support one another, because we can't rely on the system. We can't, even if we do have the funds to pay for it, it's not reliable.
Right. Because even if we do happen to get access to a service that is available, that we can afford, or that is covered by OHIP, then we're talking about wait times, right? Then we're talking about all those systemic barriers. We are going to get into, I want to get into trauma-informed care or lack thereof. All of these things then impact, how we continue to access those services or not, right? If people drop out because they're unsafe, right? They're unsafe. Never mind comfortable. It's just not safe for them, right? Yeah. Any other thoughts around that? So I'll read I'm going to read one comment related to this, and then I'll read the next comment, because I think this is a big piece too. I was once told I chose to be a mother. This experience with my firstborn really made me rethink the expectations we put on ourselves due to what society or people around us put on us based on their own manipulated ideologies. Yes, very systemic. Totally. I was bawling my eyes out in front of my doctor because I wasn't coping. She did not even ask me, "Are you okay?" Like, it was I couldn't even talk. I was like, and I can't nurse. And like, nursing was my big issue. And she was just like, "Take your domperidone. It'll be fine, blah, blah, blah." It was not fine. Like, she did not ever once, through 3 babies, ask me about my mental health. Not one time. So
yeah, this choosing this, first of all, not everybody does actively choose. It's a privilege to be able to choose sometimes, right? But like that inherently suffering comes with the job, you knew this. It is such a bullshit. I'm just saying, like, it is just like there's a lot of joy in parenthood, and there's and what Gab says, this is a community thing. This is something that to be shared. Children are to be shared. You can parent a child that you have not have any DNA related to you, or you are not the guardian of. You have these roles in community, but still we will look predominantly at birth parents, moms, when things go wrong. And this whole idea, and I'm trying to fight it so much in my husband as well, that children are the products of their parents. Look, he even said it last weekend, look at the daughter, then you know the mom. And I'm just like, are you there are mass murderers who are raised, I think YouTube, you're going to so censor me, who are raised by lovely parents, right? Like it's not like this whole pressure on, if you're not doing this right, you know, your child is going to be the most, you know, wanted on the news or something. And I think that is that whole fear of, you know, you either succeed or you fail. There's no in between, but it's going to be tough. Better get ready for the journey. Don't sleep. An exhausted parent is a good parent. You know, all these kind of messages that we're telling ourselves over and over, but also, you know, that people are giving us advice based on what they have done, because they want us to validate what they did.
Yeah.
And that's for me the most mind-blowing thing. My mother keeps telling me, you know, oh, you should have your house cleaned by 10. See, I fail every day. She never, like, I talked to her sister, she never did that. She was all the time crying on the phone, but like that was her ideal. She didn't make it. Now she wants to put it on me.
Right.
I don't know how you call that, but
Yes.
thank you.
Absolutely. And those like pressures, and a lot of times it does come down to women, mothers, right? That motherhood is sacrifice. Good moms sacrifice themselves, their health and well-being, mental, physical, emotional, right? That's the messaging. And hence why there aren't also, like Laine said, like the system is designed this way, because if as a culture, as a country, as a province, as like the system doesn't feel that we need or deserve help, right? Because we're meant to just suffer through, just suck it up. We're not going to provide those services on a systemic level. You need nursing support, too bad, figure it out or pay for it yourself, right? And if you can't afford it, like that's just another way to keep people down, right? How does that sit with you all when, you know, like you said, Gab, like this is a systems issue. Working in community mental health, community addictions, and I was an opiate case manager and counselor, that was really hard for me. That led to burnout for me, that my clients were dying and the government didn't care. We're just going to keep cutting funding, so you can't provide the support that people need. And so my clients are dying, literally. How does that sit with all of you when we talk about all these things that like, this is all systemic stuff? How do you feel about that?
I think this is where those of us who do the grassroots are really pushing and really struggling with is finding how we can support people in the ways that the systems are failing. And like this is why stuff like peer support is so important, because oftentimes we can do that for free. People who have the experience often are willing to walk alongside somebody else and just feel like, I'm going to normalize this for you. I'm going to listen to you. And I'm going to tell you that you're not crazy, that there's nothing wrong with you as a parent. The expectations of society are impossible. So what works for you and your family? What makes you and your family happy? And just, I forget what I was going to say. But you know, like it's just
support. Yeah,
we normalize and like we talk, like I mean in our peer groups we talk about like weird and random things. Like
poop is not weird and random. I'm just saying poop is an essential part of the perinatal journey. It happens or it doesn't.
Absolutely. But like we even just had like one occasion where we had a peer or a participant come to the group, and like all they really needed was to somebody to affirm for them that they were a good parent, that they were doing all the right things. And you don't get that at the like healthcare levels. They don't care. It's the conveyor belt. You just feel like you're in there for your allotted amount of time. And if you want to talk about anything else other than what you booked for, you have to book something else again.
Yep.
Which is just, you cannot assess parents, people who just had babies, in 10 minutes. It's impossible. They need like an hour, if that.
At least.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so it's just like, everything is just like, you're in, you're out, you're in, you're out. Like, how is that trauma informed? You can't like sit there with the parent and like hold space for them to be able to say like, yes, this is hard. And like, your feelings are valid.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the shift needs to happen.
Yeah. So it sounds like coping, with these systemic barriers by doing that grassroots work, providing peer support, for example, being real and authentic, in this work, and even as, a counselor, I'm so authentic and real with clients. I'm like, this is so hard. It was so hard for me too. Like, I'm not there to be the expert and be like, this is what you should do. And well, I don't know. This is your baby. I don't know what your baby needs. Right. But it's like, oh my gosh, I remember how hard that was. Yes. Oh my God, it's so isolating. Or, like that key is definitely so important. Yeah. What about?
I'm going on a soapbox a little bit here, because I have a huge problem with, like, this is a systemic issue.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there are, I hope I can keep it as general as I can before saying too much, but like, there are certain political groups and movements in this country that are completely switching our attention to things that are in fact non-issues or not really affecting us, which is going to make people vote a certain way, which is further going to certain people, and especially Black communities, especially religious communities, which are predominantly, in urban areas, they're predominantly non-white, let's put it that way, and they're going to vote for people that are going to undermine the system more. And I have a huge issue with that, with politicians pushing messaging to the forefront about things that aren't really happening, that our underfunded schools don't even have time and energy for, to make an issue, and kind of splitting up families, communities, where people feel isolated and alone, knowing that there will be no mental health care for the families that need it, whether or not they deal with this specific, issue, in lack of a better word, or perinatal mental health, or, being diagnosed with any other like mental health disorder. So, and this is what I'm really struggling a lot with, that now it becomes this huge issue that also under the whole umbrella of anti-vax and all the umbrella of all these kind of, I saw people literally just saying about the critical race theory. Like, this is not a thing in Canada, people. I saw posters with the Canadian and American flag on it. I'm just like, we're completely confused. We don't even know what we're doing and we're talking about in our communities. But somehow some political movements have taken the topics away that are really very important and very critical right now, and taken over by a thing that is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but there's no room to breathe, to put the people back into the issue. It is becoming something that is bigger than it is. Did I say that right? I don't want to say that, but this is really a huge fear for me. That's the whole thing, that things are being taken over by something, and that we're going to lose. And that makes me emotional. We're going to lose people.
Right.
We're going to lose people in this.
Right.
And yeah.
Because you're right, because when it's this big systems issue, right, it contributes, I think, I know for me, like, to feeling helpless, right, which sometimes can help us engage and do things like this, and the work that we all do, right, it puts us into action too. But it's also scary to think that, again, at that system level, the people in power are not going to address these issues. They're, not making space for the issues that need to be addressed. And that can feel scary. Like, are we ever going to get support here? Are things ever going to change? And you're right. Like, people should not be dying in Canada, anywhere, obviously, but we live in Canada. People shouldn't be dying in Canada because of a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. That should never happen. We have the ability to create a system, to have supports in place. They're not there, right? And that's the system failing people. You're right.
Yeah. And if my husband travels a lot to like reserves up north, and if you see the suicide rates there and everything, and nobody is angry about that. Nobody is saying, oh my gosh, like communities still don't have clean drinking water, or even don't drink it. You cannot even take a shower in it. Let's leave the drinking alone. You cannot even do a shower or wash your dishes because it's that polluted. But we're willing to completely be off-sided and say, oh my gosh, oh, those poor people over there. And we're completely, we're on such different train of thought here. Everybody is just jumping on it and not really looking at ourselves. Thank you, government.
I hear you. Thank you, Anneke. So I do want to kind of talk about that trauma-informed piece. And so we have a comment in the chat. In my opinion, an especially vulnerable group are the survivors of trauma, especially sexual trauma. Raising awareness, educating how not to retraumatize. Yes, I'm emphasizing that word because I see it every day in my work with clients, how not to re-traumatize women, and I would say birthing people as well, during this most vulnerable time in their lives. Educating about power, differences between patients, clients, and care providers is crucial. So let's talk about that, because I think that's what, for me, as we all do different work, right? So for me as a counselor, when I see people coming to me for birth trauma, for postpartum anxiety, or perinatal anxiety, I see so many times where the system actually contributed or created that trauma, those postpartum anxiety symptoms. And I find it infuriating. I'm going to open up the floor. What do you all think about that? What do you see in your work? What do you see in the populations that you support, that you live in terms of lack of trauma-informed care?
I feel like it's always going to come back to that same piece of system-based barriers, because when I think of trauma-informed care and the lack of trauma-informed care that I experienced, that I witnessed, it's a lack of understanding of what is considered trauma, how to support someone through trauma, how to validate trauma, and unfortunately, in a lot of professions, that isn't discussed at all. It's not discussed ever. I've had the opportunity to be a student preceptor for nursing students, and I'm consistently shocked at how little they are taught on trauma-informed care, harm reduction, supporting community, any reproductive support, anything. And, when people go to these educational systems to learn how to do this specific role, and then they enter the field, they're not set up to support people. And unfortunately, that can lead to re-traumatization, or someone attempting to do their best and say things like, well, you chose to be a mom. Aren't you happy your baby's healthy? Look on the bright side, and try to do that silver lining thing that is never helpful.
Nope. Yeah. Absolutely. Laine, go ahead.
Oh, that was weird. It wouldn't let me unmute myself for a minute. Yeah, I think that I agree with everything that Gab was saying. And I think a huge part of that is around like this idea of like efficiency, that like nurses are taught how to move through cases kind of quickly and solve a problem. And it becomes like, you become like part of an equation. And I think sometimes that makes what like is called patient-centered care actually more like a checkbox instead of a conversation. And so we need to like reframe that that way of thinking. And I think the other part of that for me is, and a lot of the work that I do and a lot of my own experiences, I think a lot about intergenerational trauma and minority stress theory that have to do less with what maybe I personally experienced in my daily life and more with how my circumstance, my identity, my family or ancestors experience, how that shapes my expectations of what's going to happen to me, and how those expectations can cause trauma and anxiety and depression. So it's not always necessarily about an individual's personal experience, but what they expect to happen to them based on their community's experiences. So has their communities, have their parents, have they been heard? Have they been able to access resources? Because all those things are actually going to have an impact on us as well.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That's such a great point. Yeah. And just a quick intro, Olivia Scobie is here joining us. Olivia, we were just talking about the lack of trauma-informed access to care and kind of how that impacts people in the perinatal period. And we have a comment as an RN. I will 100% agree with that, Gab. We had no trauma support training or support even for ourselves as nurses. Yes, I have a colleague, we run a NICU support group together, and she was a NICU she was a NICU nurse for 15 years. And she said the same thing. You know, we weren't trained in, trauma-informed care, even though as nurses, you are dealing with trauma on a daily basis, right? Again, I know this is a big topic. I will throw this out there. Ontario has the highest rates of obstetric violence in the country. And I think that's important for us to know, to understand, to take away, to think about, and how many people, again, if we are just looking at, for example, delivering a baby in this province, the amount of people that are sexually violated and traumatized when going to have a baby, that is not okay. Obviously, that is, that's obvious, right? But it's happening constantly all the time. And so then as supporters afterwards, right, we're trying to help them, process, and it's hard. It's hard. It's heavy stuff, right? But it, again, another systems issue where the education awareness is not there. So then people have to do things like this, or, get training on their own and to be trauma informed, but not everyone can do that. Not everyone has the time to do that. Not everyone's going to go and do that or even realize that that's an issue.
And it's becoming a catchword too. Like everybody is now trauma informed. I'm saying it in Dutch, but it's not true. Like it's just like, oh, we do trauma informed, this and this and this, and like it's had this whole like inclusive, like there's just a whole list that we're. And if you're asking them, they're just like, yeah, but we are. But how? What do you do? We check in with people.
Mm-hmm. So much trauma. I think, again, I know this is basic, but like so much trauma, I think, that I've seen my clients experience could be avoided if permission was asked. Can I check you? Can we do this procedure? Are you, how are you feeling? Like, give me a second, if it's not life or death, which most of the time it's not, right? And Gab's comment here, my main goal in working with the students was breaking down what care is, what it looks like, how it feels, how to care for self so that we can care for others. Absolutely. How much trauma, again, I'm just using this one example, and nurses can speak better to this than I do, but how much trauma are nurses carrying every day, right? Starting their shift with all of that trauma that they're carrying in their body. How to care for self so that we can care for others, how to recognize burnout and how to say no. It's so unfortunate that it isn't included in the training. So key. And then as well, another comment, it's such important work. Thank you for providing this type of support and education for our next generation of nurses. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Can I jump in? I think it's also like what happens when you're faced with and witnessing trauma on an ongoing basis without the tools and resources and time to process and release that. It is almost inevitable that you will engage in some form of dehumanization with yourself. Like, you have to find ways to detach in order to just show up and do your job. And when you're detached from yourself, you're going to be detached from the people that you're serving. It's easy to do the checklist when you're detached from the human experience. Yeah. And finding ways to bring humanness back into the field, I think, is crucial in shifting this experience for people. Because when we go into these systems as clients expecting to receive care, and we're there working with the extremely burnt out, underpaid, overworked provider, we leave with the opposite.
Absolutely. Commenting for sure. Well said. We could just maybe take that snippet, send it out to all birthing units in all hospitals. We start there, maybe. Yeah. Olivia, what do you see in terms of, lack of trauma-informed care, how that impacts people you work with?
I apologize for being late, everyone. I just also want to flag, I have a family member who's going through a medical trauma right now, so I may have to pop off if I get a call. I'm actually witnessing some really great trauma-aware care at the Scarborough Grace Hospital, which is quite lovely. But I really want to just reiterate what everybody else is saying. And I think that one of the pieces that's really critical for training is, yes, like all the different steps of like, this is what it means to engage in trauma-aware care. But as Gabrielle was saying, acknowledging that like healthcare providers have trauma too. And I remember reading something over the summer when I was doing some research on reproductive trauma that said the other critical piece is teaching healthcare providers how to co-regulate and how to like really know how to hold space, which is a hard thing to teach versus like ask permission. That feels a little bit clearer. But when the energy is coming is not from a like, I want to collaborate with you, I want this to like feel safer for you, even if we like hit all the checklists, it doesn't land for people in quite the same way.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's so related too to what Gabrielle was saying of like, when you're walking into your place of employment, your shift, your work, and you're walking in there like detached because that's how you survive, right? Like as humans, we have that ability to detach so we can survive these things. Then to try to connect to your body, to try to connect, to co-regulate, like you said, that's so hard, right? That is really, really hard. Absolutely. And so just, the last few minutes, of course, it's a heavy one, right? Because it's, where do we start? What do we do? I mean, we already started, right? We are doing this work on a daily basis. And I so appreciate all of you and everyone that's here that is doing this work on a daily basis, supporting people in the way you do. It's magical and it's incredible, and it's what we need, and we just keep going. And so one of the comments was about that national strategy that we don't have in terms of national policy, like we were saying. And so healthcare providers are not mandated, they're not required to ask for help. So definitely that work that Canadian Perinatal Mental Health Collaborative yeah, is so many acronyms, is working towards, they're doing really well with that, to get that in. So if we think about if everyone was listening, the systems were listening and the higher ups were listening, what do we need to make change and make these access to supports more accessible?
I think making funding more available for grassroots is huge, because if you're not a charity, you can't touch federal funding.
Nope.
And if we could have more capacity so that those in grassroots don't burn out, then we have that, like, peer support doesn't cost as much as the medical system. I'm sorry, it doesn't.
Yeah.
A lot of us do it for free. Some people, like, it doesn't have to cost a fortune, but we burn out because we are volunteering and, like, we are holding heavy stuff. But I do think that if there was more funding, then, like, we could do so much more on that peer level, which is all some people need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is definitely, even if we look at recommendations in terms of like, a pathway for supporting people in the perinatal period with their mental health, peer support is part of that pathway. It's absolutely fantastic and so helpful. Definitely. Yeah. More capacity, more funding for grassroots organizations, peer supports. What else?
I think the other thing is recognizing that, like, everyone has different needs and has their needs met in different kinds of ways, especially thinking about that aspect of time, like, and access to leisure time. So having things available in different formats, being able to meet with a flexible schedule, or having text-based assistance, or having your information provided in different languages, or as a video, or as an audio clip, or having information as an infographic. Like, people access information in different ways. So having resources available in different formats, I think, can welcome different people into the process and help people with different ways of understanding the world to access that information in ways that work for them.
Yes, such a great point. Because again, like, for some people, they might not be comfortable or need or want a group setting or an individual therapist or peer support. Like, maybe for them, reading a good, validating, trauma-informed book that is, really helpful and explains symptoms and provides some, how do you call it? Losing my words. The things that help people, tools. That can be so helpful for people, right? Or, YouTube videos or infographics, like you said, all those things, like, for information for people to digest in different ways. Yeah. Lisette said being able to email, text, or support is 100% the only way I feel comfortable asking for help. Yeah, which so many people are the same. Absolutely. Yes.
And I think for me, really understanding that this is an intersectional issue, and that, when it comes to peer support, it shouldn't be just perinatal. I think, peer support in a community that can help with a wide variety of things, and really stop seeing this as something that happens between, maybe 3 months into the pregnancy to like 1 year after, and really understanding that perinatal stage of your life can be really long, but also that other things, sexual trauma might come up, food insecurity might increase, because diapers are so expensive. And just really understanding that it is not only about mental health care, it's also meeting the basic needs, making sure that people have safe housing and that they're not insecure when it comes to food, when it comes to shelter, when it comes to the basic necessities. Because I do find that sometimes we're just so focused on diagnosing people. More people should be diagnosed. Yeah, but I like, who really cares if you are not going to see anybody anyway, and you don't have food, you don't have, secure shelter? That is not the first thing that people have on their mind. It's a very privileged thing for people to be able to go to your family doctor and say, you know what, I want a diagnosis for this. And it shouldn't be the way forward either, because I find that a lot of people, when they're talking about it, oh, more people should be diagnosed, that's not an issue, should not be an issue. We just want it for statistics would be great, right? But just helping people where they are and understanding that we cannot come to this point just looking on perinatal mental health. We have to understand that there is so much happening with these parents.
Absolutely. Yeah. Support is lacking. Lisette said in the comments, just how to support the birthing parent who's going through mental health struggle, right? Like, how can we, bring those things in and take into consideration all those intersections? Yeah. Gabrielle, do you want to share?
I feel like I just want to like double highlight what Anneke shared, because that sometimes is the biggest barrier, and like that could be the thing stressing, like causing the mental health experience, is struggling with housing, is struggling with food. Like, how am I going to get diapers for my baby? How am I going to get formula? How am I going to do this? I can't do this. I'm not good enough. I'm not this. I'm not this. If we, for the people who have the power and access to, invested in social support, social systems, in intersectional and inclusive ways, I do truly believe we would see a decrease in the numbers that they so badly want to see, right? When we take the time to pour into community, because human beings are community-oriented beings, we genuinely need one another. And when we do that, we thrive, right? And so I think, regardless of whether you're in this, watching this video as a professional or as a parent or a community member, I think finding ways to talk about it, even though it's challenging, be loud about it. And for those of us that are in professional spaces, like, definitely talk about it, definitely advocate for it, and push for policy change that addresses these issues, and not just increased mental health services, but increased food support, increased housing support. All of those things are needed to see communities thrive and flourish.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Support for the entire family system was a comment. Yeah, absolutely. And Olivia, your thoughts around that?
I just like can't, I also want to like double highlight and circle how many times in my role as a social worker doing therapy, somebody's been referred through a public service for therapy because they're having a really hard time. And they're like, my doctor said I need to go to therapy. And then as we talk about their life experiences, I'm like, oh no, you need a house.
Yeah.
It's normal that you would be like so anxious right now. You don't have a safe place to go with your baby. Like, oh, you need food. You need like reliable sources of like good food. And that like therapy can't fix that. We can talk about what that's like, but that doesn't get to the crux of like what people are really needing.
Yes. Thank you all so much. Thank you for those of you that attended and watched, and thank you for all of those that are going to watch this later on YouTube, because I know so many people are going to watch it. What I'm hearing really is community, I think, is the magic word of the day. Community for, all of us who are, in this situation and having families and, struggling and all the things, and creating this community for people to come to. And also as practitioners, as people working in grassroots organizations, as people, doing the advocacy work and all that stuff, whilst also having our own life experiences, is community for us too, right? To be able to support each other through this hard work, which is, something I know we all do. And my heart is very full and grateful for all of you and the work that you do, and for being here. And so thank you all so much. Lisette put in the chat, thank you, Lisette, about supporting the climb. So if you want to donate, support the climb, you can do that. So thank you all so much. Take care, everybody. Thank you. Bye.